Good morning. It's October 31st, 2011. It is Halloween. This sermon recap, this Monday morning Sunday sermon, is for Reformation Sunday, October 30th, 2011, there at University Lutheran Church. We celebrate Reformation Sunday always on the Sunday that's closest to October 30th. 1517, Martin Luther nailed 95 Theses on the church door on All Saints' Eve, All Hallows' Eve, which becomes in our lingo Halloween. 95 things to argue about, 95 things to discuss within the Catholic Church, and so the Reformation begins. And so we celebrate Reformation Sunday on the Sunday closest to October 30th. The Reformation began actually years ahead of Martin Luther. It just gained a lot of momentum because of some nationality issues, the printing press, but certainly people like the Bohemian reformer Jan Hus or John Huss, Wycliffe, a number of folks ahead of Martin Luther paved the road with their own suffering and their own blood in some sense that the Reformation should take place. And so it's just a day for us as Lutherans, as Protestants, to celebrate our place in history, the place that the church is in its history and her history, that Reformation is always about this day, and it's always about this year and this time of the church to be reformed over and over again. So we're glad to celebrate it. Also, yesterday we celebrated, and we're glad for a choir director at University Lutheran, Gene Geisler, who's been our choir director for years and years, upward of 20, been choir directing for far longer than that, and that she's retiring. And so we did a number of things to acknowledge her and her work and her giftedness and the choir's giftedness. And so it really was a very, very nice day for us to be together, to have a fellowship and a coffee afterward. And so that added a certain wonderful flavor, a wonderful sense to our worship. All right, to the sermon recap. On Reformation, we get a few different texts than we typically would in the normal cycle of things. We get a text from Jeremiah 31. We get Romans 3, all have sinned, therefore all are justified in grace, by grace through faith. And then we get a small portion of John 8. The Pharisees come, and there's this conversation between Jesus, and Jesus talks about if you continue in my word, you will be my disciples, and you'll be made free. And these Jews who had believed in Jesus, that's the folks he's talking to, say that we've never been slaves. And Jesus says, if you sin, you are a slave to sin. But if the Son who has a place in the house forever sets you free, you are free indeed. And so that's kind of the Reformation. That's kind of the text that always shows up on Reformation. I did something a little bit different. I picked up where we left off last week with this sense from Matthew that Matthew wants us to know the answer to the question. Then in his run-up with the Pharisees, in his build-up of the tension that is the Passion Week in Matthew, that Matthew seems to want us as listeners and readers of Matthew to know the answers to the question. And so Jesus says, whose son is the Messiah? Whose son is he? And the people answer, the son of David. And we know the son of David 10 times in the Gospel of Matthew. Son of David, son of David, son of David. The children crying in the streets of Jerusalem. The two blind men on the side of the road. Have mercy on us, son of David. But we also know 6 times in Matthew that Matthew tells us that Jesus as Messiah is Son of God. And so there's a sense that as Matthew tells his story of Jesus, we want to jump from our seats, leap from our chairs, and say, we know the answer. By whose authority do you do these things? The Pharisees asked Jesus when he cleanses the temple, and we want to leap from our chairs and says, by God, to say by God's authority. We know the answer. And so that somehow defines who we are as listeners of Matthew, of readers of Matthew. That we are the people who, in hearing the whole story, know that the answers to the question that nobody else wants to answer. Jesus says to the Pharisees, I'll answer your question by whose authority I do these things if you answer this question. By what authority did John the Baptist do what he did? And the leaders are afraid to answer the question because they say if of God, then Jesus will ask us, why didn't you listen to John the Baptist? If we say of human beings, Matthew says the Pharisees are afraid that the crowds will riot because they love John. So they don't answer. They said, we won't answer your question, Jesus. But we can answer the question. Jesus says, by what authority does John the Baptist do what he does? We can leap from our chairs and, we know the answer, like the obnoxious kid in the front row of any math class. I know the answer to that question. It's by God's authority that John did what he did. I played with starting from there and then getting to John, and John is never so clear. It's as if we want to raise our hands like we do with Matthew and offer up an answer, but then we're not sure exactly what the question is asking. And we're not so sure that our answer will even address the question being asked. I'll repost it to Facebook with this, but a couple weeks back in listening to a sermon by Pastor Dr. Dan Olson from Wartburg, he preaches on a text a couple weeks back from John right after the resurrection of Lazarus, where Caiaphas says it's better to have one man die than to have a whole nation perish. And Dr. Olson does this wonderful thing in his sermon, saying that in irony, John speaks the gospel with non sequiturs and kind of this mismatch, this kind of disjoined storytelling of John, that questions are always being asked, the answers given never match the question. When the question is redressed by Jesus as the asker, it never seems to get back to the original question. That there seems to be this dislogic in John. Not like Matthew, that we get to know the answer and then kind of jump in with the answer. It's to say that here Jesus says, if the Son makes you free, you're free indeed. And the Jews who had believed in Jesus answer the question politically. Well, we've never been slaves. Well, of course they've been slaves. Whatever happened to Egypt? Whatever happened to the Babylonians? Whatever happened to the Assyrians? Whatever happened to the current Roman rule of those who sit and listen to Jesus? And so the question is asked. It's answered in a way that doesn't really answer the question. And then Jesus redresses the question and says, but I'm talking about sin. And if the Son makes you free, you're free indeed. And by the end of the chapter, they're looking to pick up rocks and stone Jesus. Same thing in John chapter 10. Jesus goes on this wonderful, that we kind of cherish, to say, I am the good shepherd. I'm the shepherd of the sheep. The sheep hear my voice. I call them out. I go ahead of them. Anybody who enters the sheepfold other than by the gate is a thief. And then immediately he says, I'm the gate of the sheep. And the listeners are going, I thought you were the shepherd of the sheep. And Jesus says, I am the gate of the sheep. If you come in by me and go out by me. And so the people listening to Jesus beg him in chapter 10 and say, just tell us plainly, are you the Messiah? And Jesus says, I've told you plainly. Wink, wink. In John. And then says, I'm the good shepherd again. As if to say, the listeners pick up rocks again in chapter 10. After these wonderful things that Jesus is talking about, they pick up rocks and say, we've had enough of this cat because we're not sure what's going on. I'm the sheep, I'm the shepherd, you are the sheep, I'm the gate, I'm the shepherd again. It's as if John wants to drive us over and over again. It's not that John doesn't want us to understand that Jesus is the Messiah. They ask plainly, Jesus, tell us if you are the Messiah. We know that from John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is Logos. This is the Messiah. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. We get it. We hear it. But it's as if John doesn't want us to walk away once we know the answer. Jesus says in the text from yesterday for Reformation, if you continue in my word, you will truly be my disciples. If you continue in my word. Reformation is about discipleship today. It is as if John says that you will need this word. You will need this Christ. Not some simple formula, not some simple creed. You will need this Christ this very hour, this very moment, but also tomorrow and the next day. And the discipleship is not about giving the right answer, but discipleship is about sitting down in this word for a long time. The word, if you continue in my word, again, in John we think Logos, we think in the beginning was the word who is God, who is Christ. So to continue in this one, to continue in this word is to continue in the Christ, to be a disciple, to sit down and listen. John's gospel is all about the I am statements. Again, it's as if John wants us to sit down and sit at the feet of this Jesus who is Messiah, who is the bread of life, who is living water, who is the resurrection and life, who is the way, the truth, and the life. I am the light of the world. I am the salt. You are the salt and light. It says to say that to sit down long in this word, John wants us to be disciples. Not to give an easy answer, not to give a simple memorized formula, but to sit down long in this word that is Christ, the I Ams. Sarah, my Sarah, last spring already, we were preaching, talking about in church, the woman at the well in John. And one of the commentators said that he had the sense that, or she had the sense that maybe the woman at the well had an instant that she had hoped that maybe Jesus too was an outcast. Here was a Jewish person on the wrong mountain at the wrong time of the day, just like she was, even though she was Samaritan, she was at least on the right mountain. And she had a glimmer of hope. We all know this hope. That maybe she thought that this Jew, that this Jewish rabbi was an outcast too. And he turns out to be the Messiah. And my Sarah, on our drive home, we were talking about this and the humanity of who this woman is and the humanity of who this Jesus is. And Sarah said that for her, and I've written this across the top of every single page in the Gospel of John, that for Sarah, she said that Jesus was this twisted surprise of a Messiah. He isn't what we're always looking for, and he isn't what we always think he's going to be, but he is Messiah. And that's the sense I get in the John text for Reformation. You've been slaves, we've never been slaves. You've been slaves to sin, Son set you free. If you continue my word, you will be my disciples, and you will be free indeed. It is a good and gracious and profoundly hopeful word for the world, for the church, for you and for me as a disciple of one, a follower of one who follows Christ, this Jesus. It's a wonderful answer that we're given. It's just not the same kind of excited ooh answer that we get, I think, that we get in Matthew. That we are much more perplexed to set down our stones. Our stones of self-assurance, our stones of hatred, our stones of any kind of preconceived notion of who this Messiah is going to be. And to sit down long at the feet of the Christ and be disciples and continue in his word. That's the Reformation. It's a Reformation for all of us, for the whole church, for the world. God bless you in all things. Have a wonderful Halloween. Eat lots of candy. Have fun. Talk to you soon.